Now, I just posted a few other clips. One being a lecture, and then one kind of visualizing an important moment that created the legend of George Washington, um, and then talking about the Scots-Irish and their involvement in the Revolutionary War, but also what their origins are from, and much of what we think of now as hillbillies, and many of us of our own ancestry that are white Protestant Americans. Andrew Jackson was a Scots-Irish, an Ulster Irish, as they're called. In other words, you know, Protestants at the expense of Catholics in Ireland, which is going to later explain the anti-Irish, anti-immigrant, the issue about Irish Catholic immigrants. It's going to take place later. You can now see that where the roots are going to be coming from, because they went all the way back into Ireland in the north, which still exists today. Anyhow, I wanted in the middle of this to then just kind of do a discussion of the fact that the French are going to be lobbied by American diplomats. We're going to see Thomas Jefferson also eventually, having work with France. Benjamin Franklin was an ambassador, and the help that we received from the French cannot be understated. Hugely important. Okay, that was mentioned in one of the lectures that I posted. But let's keep this in mind. And later, to the point that it's actually going to bankrupt France and lead to their own revolution and fall, which is going to divide our founding fathers, which is what we'll talk about later. But in any case, in 1776, Benjamin Franklin sails to France, ambassador to the court there, and he spoke French. The ladies loved him. I know when you see this picture of him, you might not be able to figure out why. Well, Henry Kissinger said infamously that power is the world's greatest aphrodisiac. So, excuse me. When you're an important, powerful person, it's amazing how much better you look, I guess, in that context, right? He was known to be charming as well. And there was a signed treaty of alliance with the Americans in 1778. Okay, this was huge. And Benjamin Franklin actually, he kind of played off he was very intelligent. I mean, first of all, we know Benjamin Franklin. He's also one of those guys that has a lot of legends about him, and he wrote these great, the Poor Richard's Almanac is what I'm thinking of. He had great wit. He's kind of a Renaissance man. I think he's one of the more interesting founding fathers as well. I'm not going to take too much time on him. I think he's somebody that you should explore. A lot of the things that make him interesting to me are just his personality and things that he contributed to, like on a kind of cultural, personal level. But he's one of our founders that's on the bill, but he never was president, right? Okay, so notice here what H.W. Brands said. He said, there was a vogue for things American in France at this time. Many French intellectuals looked to America as a new world, and as a fresh world, as a world where human nature was closer in natural origins than the human nature that one found in the confines of Europe. And that had a lot to do with Enlightenment thinkers like Rousseau, who had this kind of fantasy that, this idea of a noble savage. And so the fact that Americans were living in the frontiers of wilderness, which were no longer available in Europe, gave a mystique, and Benjamin Franklin played that up. So this picture of him here with this coon hat, it was reported that he wore this to come off as a rugged frontiersman. In other words, he was an urban dweller. Benjamin Franklin wasn't out there with the hillbillies, shooting rabbits or climbing mountains, but he pulled off that image to kind of woo the people at the French courts, and it worked, and he was able to get that aid from abroad. So just kind of wanted to point that out. And we end eventually with a success at the Siege of Yorktown. Okay. Now I realized that, as I mentioned, I'm not covering some of these things blow for blow. And for those of you who like this straight narrative of the revolution and to look at all those set of events, I realize you might be a little bit disappointed. But again, you can find any of those on YouTube clips to watch. Mainly though, I think you know it, that this is the pivotal last major battle is at Yorktown in 1781. And then we have the Treaty of Paris in 1783, ending the American Revolutionary War between Great Britain. Okay, so it's really, remember, 1776 is when we had the Declaration of Independence, but it really doesn't get resolved until this time. Okay, so that's something for you to remember. And of course, now we start a chapter in creating a new country. You win a war and you create a new country. What I think is interesting is in the middle of all this, again, as you read the turmoil that was taking place on the ground in Zen's book, for example, what do you do in the aftermath? Many loyalists, they were loyal to the British. What's going to happen to them from the war until now? Many are going to flee or be expelled, one could argue, to Canada or other places. You have soldiers returning home that have neglected their farms. What's going to happen there? We're gonna learn more about Shays' Rebellion. That's going to take place later, where that's going to become an issue. What about the issue of slavery? When we have some states that have it and others that don't. What will be the role of colonies? How will they govern themselves? They want it to be independent. Well, okay. How does that look like? How does it work? We will be going over those things in some detail, and the creation from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution, and some of these important questions about the earlier parts of the American Revolution. And so already so far, after reading Zen's book and looking at some of this, you will have noticed that you've learned a lot of different things, or been brought different perspectives than you saw in high school. These things were all maybe mentioned in certain cases, but not necessarily highlighted as much. Okay. And then you'll see that even more as we go along into the background and the backdrop of the Constitution. I'm looking forward to also kind of doing a discussion of the issue of guns and the Second Amendment and all of that. So I will end this here. I'm going to end my lecture by actually having the last post of the thoughts on the American Revolution on the crash course. Again, I don't always agree with him. I think he kind of does kind of what I'm into doing, which is posing questions for you to think about, and that'll help you maybe kind of think some more about what you're going to want to write for your paper, at the end of the week. So that is it. If there's any questions, especially about things that I did not cover, which were a lot still, please feel free to contact me as always. Thanks.